Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 8 stories. We have some night drive stories, some deep wood stuff, even a story about an elderly couple going through some very strange happenings. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's go for 1,450 likes on this one. I think we could do it. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this as often as possible. I absolutely adore what I do, and if you enjoy it as well, why not subscribe? I would love to have you here. Anyway, enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Family road trips are fun, especially when there's no adults involved. Well, that wasn't entirely true. My oldest cousin Farhan is an adult technically. He's 22 and a half, and he's always been the most perfect, flawless golden child. So of course our parents were okay with him taking the rest of us on a little road trip. Zero parental supervision, just the 4 kids. And the trip itself was a success. We had mounds of fun at the resort. The only downside was that I'm pretty sure my youngest cousin peed in one of the swimming pools while I was right next to him. On purpose because he thought it was funny. But whatever. We did shower at the end. It was nearing 10 p.m. now, and we'd been on the road home for about an hour. We were supposed to be back by now, but a couple of unexpected flat tires had slowed us down. Our parents admittedly got a little iffy when we let them know. They'd hoped we'd be back by 10, but I was sure we'd be fine. Farhan would take care of us. Can I have the chips? Rafia fumbled her arms over my shoulders from the back seat, feeling around for the coveted food. I groaned. No, I told you I'm not opening the bag yet. I'm saving it for later. When's later? Whenever I get hungry. Why is it when you get hungry? What about my hunger? 'Cause the chips are mine, duh. I bought them. Rafia plopped back in her seat, pouting. I rolled my eyes. 9-year-olds. Tushar, our youngest cousin, giggled at her from his booster seat. Haha, no chips for you. Shut up, Tushy. It's Tushar. Tushy, Tushy, Tushy. Guys, shh. Can't hear the GPS. Farhan poked me. Calm them down. What? Why me? You're the second oldest. You're the deputy. Turn right in 1 mile. The GPS chimed in with a random direction every now and then, but mostly it just felt like we'd been driving forward and forward for miles. Maybe it was just the darkness. We weren't exactly in a very urban area at the moment. All I could see around me were dark, eerie outlines of trees and such. Sometimes we passed fields of crops too, as one does in Bangladesh. There wasn't even any other cars near us. Just us, a long winding path, and a fairly cloudless night sky. Turn right. The GPS piped up. Alrighty. We drove on straight for a few more minutes. I'd given in and handed Rafia the bag of chips because I couldn't deal with her pestering anymore. She crunched them quietly while Tushar tried to nap. I figured his small 6-year-old body had had enough. The GPS piped up again after like 10 minutes of driving. Turn left. Okie dokie. I grabbed a few chips from Rafia and thought maybe I should try and nap too. I wasn't sleepy, but I was majorly bored. We had played stuff like I Spy and 20 Questions on the way here, but at this point we were all pretty sick of car games. Turn left. Farhan frowned. There's no turn. Left where? I looked at the GPS. The screen was clearly showing a left turn. I looked outside. No left turns. No fork in the road at all. just a straight ahead path. Maybe it's a glitch. Frick. Have we been driving the wrong way? I don't know. Try resetting it. Ferran restarted the device and punched in the address again. The screen flashed up again in our faces and I blinked. Turn left, it chimed. The route displayed was the same, with a left turn and a non-existent fork in the road. Where even are we? Rafia asked. I shrugged. In between Comilla and Dhaka somewhere. Those are both places in Bangladesh, in case you didn't know. I looked at the location on the screen. Oh no, we're right by those woods everyone says are haunted. What? Rafia shrieked. Stop scaring her, Ferran muttered. They're not haunted, Rafia. It's just a dumb story. Yeah, try telling that poor missing kid that. Basically, there was some big news story a few weeks earlier about a missing kid in this place. 8-year-old boy, dark hair, last seen in a Pikachu shirt and shorts. Ran away from home at night, thought he could stay in the woods, and then no one ever found him. They did find his backpack that was dropped around this road, and since then, people have been making up stories of haunted woods. If you ask me, maybe he's still lost out there, or some animal ate him, or he got kidnapped. No need to jump to dramatic conclusions. But hey, it was fun to scare little cousins. Rafia was glaring at me now and I smirked at her in response. I'm so confused. Ferran scratched his head. Should I turn left? Into the forest? It's not really a forest, Rafia put in. I mean, it is, but over here there's less trees and stuff. And look, there's a small trail. The car would totally fit, right? I don't want to drive the car in there. Look at our surroundings. It's dark and creepy as hell. Ferran replied. What if there's some wild animals and stuff? And the trail is for walking, Rafia, I explained. Rafia scowled. So, maybe it's a shortcut. Maybe it's a quicker way home. The GPS knows better than you. I want to see the animals. A sleepy Tushar chimed in. Turn left. God, shut up, you stupid machine. We get it. I snapped. Rafia and Tushar giggled. Ferran looked lost in thought. Look, how about this? I can go check out the trail. What? I guess it might actually be a road or something that got overgrown by grass. Maybe Rafia's right and it is a shortcut. We all peered out the window into the area. It didn't look like it was ever a road for cars to me. Definitely a hiker's trail at most. Not to mention how eerie and unsettling it looked in the darkness. Surrounded by trees with winding, creepy branches that looked like hands trying to grab you. I didn't like the idea of going in there. I don't think you should go, I murmured. Ferran had already turned on his phone flashlight. I'm not. I'm just going to shine the light in to make sure we're not missing some hidden road. Okay? He ruffled my hair. Stay in the car. Turn left, said the GPS again. I groaned at first and then glanced at the machine. Something felt very slightly off about that last turn left. I was about to restart the thing when it piped up again louder. Turn left, turn left, turn left. What the hell? Ferran murmured. He pressed the power button multiple times, but to our surprise, the screen stayed on. Turn left. It said. And then it said it again. Who is that? Rafia cried. I'd realized why the voice had sounded off earlier. It was no longer the original robotic GPS at all. It sounded human. Turn left. Turn left. What the hell? Turn it off. Aisha, try turning it off. Turn left, turn left, turn left. It was positively screaming now. Rafia covered her ears while Tushar started whining. I don't like it. Make it stop. What's the matter with it? You need to turn left right now. We stared at the machine in horror. I don't know a whole lot about how technology works, but I'm pretty damn sure they aren't programmed to say stuff like that. Turn left right now, it shrieked, the voice getting more and more hoarse. Something about the urgency in it was getting to me. I blinked a few times. Was that fear I detected? Is it haunted? It's the ghost from the haunted woods. It's gonna get us. Rafia cried. Turn left, Tushar yelled. Just turn, make it be quiet. I'm not going in the... A wild animal can't be worse. Then the GPS yelled some more for us to turn left. Farhan turned left. The car stumbled through the grass and rocks and loudly screeched to a stop in the middle of the trees, and a cold silence settled around us. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. I tried to slow my breathing and looked at the cursed GPS screen. It stopped. Tushar's small voice squeaked from behind us. Farhan turned around. Are you guys okay? He said gently. Rafia and Tushar nodded, looking scared out of their lives. I wanted to hug them so bad. Farhan nodded. Okay. It's okay. We'll get out of here soon. I noted his subtle expression change, from comfort to confusion. I turned around too, as did Rafia and Tushar. We all stared out the back window of the car, towards the street we had just swerved out from. I frowned at first, not sure what I was seeing. It was dark enough anyway, and now even our headlights weren't there. We only had the moonlight to go off of. What was that? Some kind of shape on the street? A shadow? Clack, clack, clack. What the hell? Clack, clack. It was coming from the street. With every clack, the sounds got closer and closer. Tushar and Rafia hugged each other while I grabbed Farhan's arm. Clack, 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 clack. Closer, closer. And then it finally came into view. I say it because to this day I don't know what it was. All I know is that it was big, deformed, and had giant claws dragging along the ground. At least, the ones on its front limbs were dragging on the ground. The claws on its legs, I assume, were the culprits behind the clacking noise. They smacked against the ground in every step it took. Nobody said a word. It moved into full view of us, and I thought I could see something dripping off its entire body. Slime. Blood. The drops made little splashing noises as they slithered off its grotesque figure and fell on the concrete. A sickening moan escaped its mouth. Rafia stumbled backwards and Farhan winced. Tushar clutched his stuffed giraffe as hard as he could, but none of us looked away from the creature. It let out a sickening moan again. Thick fluid was sliding out of its mouth in mounds. I was suddenly beyond grateful it was dark. I had no desire to have a clear view of whatever the hell that was. I dimly made out the silhouette of teeth. Large, jagged bits that could have easily ripped my flesh apart. It let out another awful moan. And then, clack, clack, clack. It was moving forward. Clack, 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 clack. I thought I heard Farhan finally start breathing again. Tushar seemed to loosen his grip on the giraffe, and Rafia sat upright. Clack, clack. None of us made any noise until the last clack had died out. Even afterward, for a few seconds, nobody spoke. Recalculating. I nearly jumped out of my skin, and all three of my cousins did too. I almost laughed and turned back around to the now welcoming bright screen of the GPS. Proceed to the route, it said. The usual robotic monotone back now. The fork in the road it was showing earlier was gone. Now it only showed the car in the woods just slightly far off from the street. Proceed to the route, it said again. Rafia giggled very slightly, and even I cracked a smile. Ferran exhaled in relief. I never imagined I'd be so happy to hear that drab robot voice. Proceed to the route, said Tushar quietly, and smiled too. I am, buddy. Gotta back out first. We backed out of the forest and, as per the instructions, proceeded to the route. Ferran situated the car on the street again. Rafia finished the last of the chips and handed me the bag, noticing something in the process. Who's that? She asked. What? Who? In the rectangle mirror. She pointed at the rear-view mirror, and I looked. A little boy of about 8 was looking at us through the car's back window. Dark hair and a Pikachu shirt. His skin and eyes looked cold and dead, but for some reason, I wasn't scared. The child smiled, and a familiar voice we'd heard earlier from a certain GPS floated around us. Turn left. I'm glad you listened. I'm glad we listened too, little fella. Some people like to act like their childhood was perfect, that the cliche, blurry memories that sit in a photo book in their mind were their only experiences during their developing years. The misleading neon lights that lead to anecdotes of Play-Doh and kindergarten recesses tease them into thinking that their early years were filled with joy, laughter, and universally shared experience. They were normal. Their parents were fine. Well, I did not get the fortune with a present father. My mother made up for it with a constant abundance of gifts, general sweetness, and basically allowing me to get away with anything. Encouraging some mischief even. It seemed as if every problem present in my life was swung away by the wrecking ball that was my mother. Today, this assumption was broken down in my hippocampus like dynamite to a 19th century brick wall. Last week, my mother died. Of course, it was unfortunate, but that is not the topic of my recent experience. Recently, as her only child and her being an only child herself, I had to sort out her home. I went through boxes and boxes of jewelry, china, corny decorations, and fake flowers. I left the attic for last because I knew some of the toughest things were going to be upstairs. I also tasked my work buddy, David, a man I've always thought of as the most straightforward and tough man I knew, to help me move all of these things out of the house. We both slightly were overweight middle-aged men, had to slowly climb up the pull-down attic ladder. As we entered, we were immediately met with a strong fragrance of dust and mold. Cobwebs filled the whole attic with cardboard boxes littered about. Has she entered here in the past 10 years? Possibly not. A near life-size Santa doll also sat in the decrepit crawl space. We both got to work shifting through the boxes before bringing them downstairs. David found some miniature angel figures, Doctor Who memorabilia, and ammo for a missing gun. I found an old Jack in a box, an NES, and an extremely torn kite of which neither of us had an answer for why it could have been saved. There was nothing else of note that we had found except for the last one. All of the boxes were shifted through and extracted except for one in the corner. I had avoided this box, not for a reason of location, for I had actually started near the box, but because of the noticeable stench that surrounded the box. It smelled as if someone had roasted a rat, then threw it into a soiled toilet. Words have trouble describing how it filled your nose and dropped you to your knees. David had the idea of spraying some deodorant spray, which helped minusculely. I took some of the rubber gloves I had found on the other side of the attic and slowly opened the box. I had a sigh of relief, for all I saw on top was a photo album. I lifted the album off to see a towel covering the bottom of the box. As one of those with those positive childhood delusions, I decided to skim through the album and see what I could find. The first photo depicted a dark night sky with stars I could no longer find in the sky in my own urban apartment. The photo was clearly rushed, though, for there was large streaks. It seemed someone was actively moving the camera as the button was pressed. Below it, another photo featuring me sitting on the curb. A sip of parchment labeled it as me waiting for the bus. Some other photos filled the next few pages that are without importance. My mind was at ease with the flashes of old memories I had not thought of for decades. This was until the next photo. The window of my childhood neighbor, Mr. Robin. As he adjusted his suit in the mirror, I recognized it as taken from the second-story bathroom window, the only one with a sight into Mr. Robin's house. If me and my neighbor friends ever took a step into his yard, he would burst through the door with a cane in hand and a bellowing voice full of profanities. I never enjoyed his seemingly omniscient presence, as he often found time to chit-chat with my mother, but I never quite despised him. I also remembered him passing away when I was 8 years old. That's when my mother had to explain to me what death was. Mr. Robin was an odd old man. I had no explanation for this photo, for I never remembered handling the camera. My mother would never let me. And of course my mother would never take a creepy photo of our neighbor. Maybe I snuck the camera once. But then why would my mother frame it in the photo album? Unlike most of the other photos, only being shared with the night sky one, there was no label underneath explaining the contents. This broke my brain in more ways than one, but I had to move on. I was going to get no explanation without looking further, considering the fact my mother was currently in a funeral home morgue. Another set of boring childhood memories flooded by as I kept turning the pages. I then found a third image, a set of curtains taken from the outside of a home whose patio wall I recognized as the curtains had robins plastered on them. I remembered these as belonging to Mr. Robin, which I remembered because I found the similarity amusing when I was little. This time I opened my jaw. Less from the contents of the photo, but the continuation of this odd saga of my neighbor's home. What was worse was a second photo, with the curtains slightly withdrawn, and in the opening between them sat Mr. Robin reading the newspaper. This time I dropped the book. I called for David. My voice, for the first time in years, was quivering as I showed him the photos. He showed a slight concern, but made an excellent point in the fact maybe she had gotten permission and was doing these photos for him. For what? I am not sure, but really any explanation other than a story of something sinister was greatly appreciated. I kept moving. Birthday parties, basketball games, weddings of distant relatives I couldn't recognize. More memories flowed past my busy mind. I wasn't even looking at the normal photos anymore. I was just searching for any sort of explanation or another lead to what these photos might mean. A few unexplainable but less so creepy photos passed by. A wedding ring I did not recognize. A lantern glowing in a forest, held by my mother's hand. An open book. These photos matched in the unexplainable and lack of labels, but less so in what seemed to be the stalking of Mr. Robin. My heartbeat had slowed, but my interest was peaking. I kept turning and turning. That wasn't until I found the photo. possibly the worst one I had seen. I had a pretty sheltered life, taken from what was clearly the inside of a closet. Between the crack of the door, there was Mr. Robin laying alone in his bed. My face went numb. My heart rate doubled. I started to hyperventilate. David was busy in the kitchen, but told me later he had a bad feeling at that moment and went upstairs to come check on me. He noticed me pale in the face and staring down at that darn book. He put a hand on my shoulder and saw the photo himself. David, a man I had only known from comments about the weather and ramblings on his life that carried me through the boredom of my day, gasped as if he had seen a ghost. He stumbled backwards, but was able to find his way back up straight. Something's wrong with your mom, man. That or you were a demon child. There was one thing I knew about my childhood self. I was a scaredy cat. Even if I absolutely loathed Mr. Robin, I would never had the idea or the guts to sneak into an old man's home. And it was clear the height of this person was not a small child. I had no doubt in my mind that was my mother. I had reached the last page, and below that was one last image, a small human-shaped dirt mound on the ground, as if a hole that was just buried right next to it at the dead of night in a lantern right nearby. My mind was so numb at this point, I could think of nothing but to lift the towel from the bottom of the box. In it, a human finger and a ring attached to it. I fainted, but luckily David was there with me and brought me to the hospital. David, fortunately, did not tell the hospital staff of the situation and explained I felt sick all day. They chalked it up to dehydration and stress. I am now laying in my hospital bed. In the meantime, I had horrible nightmares that I am too afraid to speak of, but in them I realized something. In the dream, there was a carbon copy of what I remembered as my mother's camera, and in it, I knew how to use it perfectly. After I awoke, memories I had long repressed came back to me like an avalanche. I did despise Mr. Robin. I used the camera. I conquered my fear. Tomorrow I will be released from the hospital. Tomorrow I will have to clean up the rest of my mother's home. Tomorrow I will have to pay David. Tomorrow I will have to destroy the photos. My mother always encouraged my mischief. Does anyone else remember the game of locks? It was one of those online games for kids. I remember playing it as a reward in elementary school. You would travel from location to location, interacting with colorful NPCs, and solve puzzles to break the locks that kept them trapped. I'm asking for a friend of mine, Ethan, called me the other day and asked about it. It was so out of the blue because Ethan and we haven't talked in years. We lost touch after high school, I guess, but we barely got through pleasantries before he starts asking me about the game. Did I remember it? Do I ever think about it? That kind of stuff. Before he said the name, I hadn't thought about the game of locks in years. Not since middle school. Maybe it was Mr. Petrock who first showed it to us. Ethan and I were both considered gifted, and twice a week the two of us and a handful of others would shuffle out to Mr. Petrock's classroom for special classes. It all felt like games, really. Problem solving and out-of-the-box thinking. But whoever finished early was free to jump on one of the dusty PCs along the back wall, where Mr. Petrock would let us log into the game of locks. Ethan and I debated for a while about whether or not it was a website. I remember clicking on the desktop icon, a pixelated brass key, but he remembers it opening a web browser. A shortcut, maybe. If so, there's nothing about it still around. We even tried using the Wayback Machine, but nothing came up. He says he called me because he was having dreams about the game. In them, he's seated at a large table with characters from the game. The mini-eyed sloth, Zerthas, the undulating, the speaking crawler, etc. When the hateful Dodger walks in, the Dodger, who wears a loose-fitting jester's outfit, and whose oversized face is set in a permanent scowl, acts as the guide in the game. He walks you through the controls when you log in, gives you hints, introduces you to each new area of the map, things like that. Anyway, he walks in and starts talking to Ethan, telling him how much they've all missed him. He showers Ethan with praises as dinner is brought in on silver trays. In the dim torchlight, the Dodger cuts slices of some indeterminate roast while the sloth brings out casks of honeyed ale. Ethan eats and drinks his fill. When the dinner is finished, the assembled characters are still telling Ethan how smart he is, how funny and clever. They tell him that the puzzles he solved weren't for just anyone. Only smart boys and girls were allowed to play the game, and only the smartest were able to solve all the puzzles. They croon at him, meat and ale dripping from their open maws. The Dodger reminds Ethan that he got the farthest in the whole class, that he was the only one to reach the floating islands of Carthun, where Ictalus Aten lays trapped beneath the stones. He tells Ethan that Mr. Petrock has left their service and that they are in need of a new seneschal to break their chains, to free them and their king, that he's been chosen. Only, I remember the day that Ethan reached Carthun. We were both playing, and I was only a level or two behind him because I'd had to go pee. When I got back from the bathroom, he was at the great gates that barred entry to the islands, and he was stuck. Instead of getting back to my game, I stopped to help him. We finished the puzzle, but the bell rang as I went back to my own computer. Mr. Petrock came and checked our progress, and his face lit up when he saw Ethan had made it so far. He told me to head back to homeroom and kept Ethan behind to discuss some things. I don't know why I didn't say something then, about how we'd worked on it together. I do remember lingering in the doorway, trying to catch Ethan's eye, but he was too giddy at the extra attention to look my way. I was furious at my best friend's betrayal. Mr. Petrock no longer had Ethan play the normal games with the rest of us, telling him to focus all of his class time on the game. The rest of us were still allowed to play when we finished, but what was the point? Glancing over at the fractal patterns and geometric puzzles on Ethan's screen, I knew there was no point in being the second to reach that level. It wasn't long after that Ethan's seizures started. He was diagnosed with some rare form of epilepsy that had remained dormant up to that point, and taken out of class for the rest of the year. Mr. Petrock was more reserved after that, and he limited how long we could play the game. I went to his classroom after school one time hoping to play some more, and found that the door was closed, despite the narrow window being blocked by a sheet of black construction paper. I could see light pouring from the crack beneath the door. It shifted between blue and purple, pulsating in a way that made it difficult to look at for a long while. I pressed my ear to the door, but heard nothing. I tried the handle and found that it was unlocked. I eased it open, my heart pounding in my ears to find nothing. Mr. Petrock was just seated at his desk, head bent down. There was a lit candle sitting in front of him, and he quickly blew it out when he saw me. He smiled and asked if there was something he could do for me. I stuttered out something about looking for a jacket and left. Anyway, Ethan says the dreams come every night, with the hateful Dodger and the others urging him to find the game and solve the puzzles. They promise him wealth and power. He never gets any rest during these dreams apparently, and I could hear how tired he was in his voice. He says he's starting to hallucinate, starting to see the characters in real life, hearing their whispers, seeing their forms behind shower curtains and through keyholes. He was hoping that I had heard something of the game, that I could help him find it. Which is why I'm posting here. Has anyone heard of the Game of Locks? I'd love to track down the website or a hard copy. The only thing is, well, I don't think Ethan deserves to beat the game. He had my help, but I don't think anyone else knows that. And I don't think I deserve to either. But my son, Sean, is getting ready to start in his own gifted class. He's a bright kid, maybe the brightest, smarter than me in every respect, and he's really, really good at puzzles. I want to tell you all about my experience. It may not be that scary to read, but for me, it was, and my family. I have never posted here or anywhere, so bear with me. We have always loved hiking and being outdoors. I was excited when we moved to our new house because there is a huge area filled with trees for us to wander through. Up behind the woods, you can hear gunshots, as there is a shooting range nearby. No big deal, but it's not like they are hunting in my woods. It's just me, my husband, and our 11-year-old son. I will refer to them as Hubs and Little B. It was a beautiful Saturday in the summer. The only problem was the darn mosquitoes and gnats swarming around trying to get a quick drink from us. We bathed ourselves in bug spray, packed some bottles of water, snacks, more bug repellent, and the usual small first aid kit, and headed out into the unknown. It was nice and relaxing. The trees gave us much needed shade as we trudged through the woods, trying to create our own path. The only thing I was worried about was running into a bear. Living in New England, it's not uncommon to see one roaming around. I couldn't shake this feeling that we were being watched. Hubs could tell that I was a little bothered by something, so he suggested we find a spot to sit for a few and relax. Little B didn't like that, but he had no choice. We found an old, downed tree and sat down. I thought I kept seeing something out of the corner of my eye peeking at us from behind trees, but when I looked, there was nothing. Must have been my mind playing tricks on me. Too many horror movies. I tried to think of something else, but I thought I saw it again. So I pretended to look in the opposite direction and then quickly turned in the direction I thought I saw something. And I saw it. It was someone wearing a white hood ducking behind a tree. My heart started pounding and I started sweating. I had to stop and quickly think. I didn't want to scare my son, so I told them I wasn't feeling good and wanted to go home. Little B was not happy. He was having fun and wanted to explore. Why can't you just go home and Dad and I can keep going? He complained. Hubs looked at me and shrugged, implying he agreed with Little B. I couldn't think of a good excuse fast enough. Because I don't want to walk back by myself and... I was interrupted by the sudden soft sounds of laughter. Their eyes grew wide as they heard it too. Yeah, alright, let's go. Come on, Little B. Hubs said. His tone was shaky. We grabbed our stuff and took off towards the road. We could hear footsteps in the bushes and trees behind us. Whoever this was enjoying this. Us being afraid and trying to hurry out of the woods. Every few minutes the laughter would start again, growing louder and more menacing each time. I was terrified, but I tried not to show it. My son was scared and Hubs and I had to be the protectors. I kept seeing him from my peripheral, but how? It sounded like he was behind us, but I kept seeing him besides me. Was there more than one? Was this even a person? What the hell was going on? The edge of the woods was in sight. I was anxious to get us all out of there. With the laughter coming from all around us, we started running. As we ran out of the woods, I felt a strong breeze hit my face that whispered to me something I will never forget. The soft, soothing voice brushing by my ear whispered, "It is not that easy." Ever since I have stayed far away from those woods. I don't know what that voice meant, but I still think I see the white hooded figure out of the corner of my eye when I am home. But when I turn, there is nothing. The worst part is, it keeps getting closer. At first, I'd see it through a window, kind of. It'd be in my peripheral but gone when I looked. Then it would be in the other room. Finally, today, I could see it through the half-open closet. This time it didn't disappear when I looked. It just lurked in the dark. I ran. I am afraid of how much closer it will get, or what it will do. I don't think it is going to be very friendly. I don't know about any of you, but I like to run and walk for miles sometimes. Most people enjoy going for a 15 or 30-minute jog. Me? I can walk for a long time. Recently I moved to a small town. No more big city beach walks for me. Now it's all in the countryside. Farmsteads and quiet forever stretching open roads. So you can imagine my walking and running abilities have taken advantage of this. Once I swear I ran so far that the sun took an extra few hours to set. None of this is important. I'm just bragging here. What is important is what happened yesterday. I woke up, ate the health breakfast, got dressed and ready for a long walk. I reckoned I'd make 100 kilometers that day. The day was perfect. Blue skies, clouds, but not the kind to worry about. Birds and not too hot of a sun. I started down the old farming land highway that no one ever uses anymore, as it's quiet and has spectacular scenery. Walking down this road, I get to an uphill. My Nikes not making a sound in the quiet of the morning. Farming lands all around me with beautiful Dutch settler-style houses dotting the distances. Because of this place being so out of the way, one could easily find snakes in the road or in the shrubbery next to the road, and various other animals from rats to turtles, whatever you could think. Getting atop the hill, I reach for my bottle without stopping and taking a small sip. Conserving resources is important out here. I'm on the open black tarmac looking as far as I can see. Mountains and valleys in the distance making the background farmland on my right, and an old forestry land on my left that hasn't been tended in decades. I hear rummaging sounds in the bushes when I pass by, and know it's obviously whatever sorts of animals live in there, but nothing too big to be afraid of. That's when I first saw him. A man maybe 6'3", skinny and aged between 18 and 20-something. He was standing about 50 meters from me behind the fence of the forestry farmland by one of the burnt-out trees from last summer's fire season. He was wearing a hoodie that could be considered a cowl, as you couldn't see his eyes, just that grin of razor-sharp fucking teeth smiling at me. In hindsight, I don't even know how he could see me with his hood pulled over his eyes, but as I walked, that smile followed me, and I could swear I saw those teeth biting his own bottom lip, drawing blood at each sharp point. I felt extreme panic rise in me, and goosebumps cover me up, so I started jogging. I would have turned around and gone home, but that would have meant being in his eyesight for longer, and him possibly seeing where I live. So I started jogging on the straight-wide black tarmac, once used by farmers and cattle trucks, now just for the occasional tourist. I looked over my shoulder and saw the hills descend had hidden me from his view, which I felt good and scared about at the same time because I don't know where the fucker is. Around 20 kilometers away, I stop for a break and keep my walking pace. As the old saying goes, if I can't run, I can walk. If I can't walk, I'll crawl, but I'll never stop moving. I was about 30 kilometers into my day and the sun was blazing down on me. Birds had gone and the chirps were gone with them. Walking, I made out lots of creatures. Crickets, dead snakes, roadkill, ants. That's when the sun made me feel like an ant, crawling on the surface of a carcass. I looked behind me, still feeling sick from whoever I saw back there, and I was pleased to see nothing, nobody, just me and the road. Until, of course, a car. I first heard the car before I saw it. Out here, a car can be heard for miles before it reaches you. I saw it coming from far ahead, and down below the hill I was descending. Again, that went around a bend at the bottom. It was a white Ford pickup truck. From a little away, I could tell there was a family in, and they weren't driving very fast as people coming through here usually do. They flashed their lights at me in the daytime, which was weird because I was walking on the shoulder of the road, and so I thought it was just a greeting. As they passed at a snail's pace, I could see something was wrong. The father of the man driving made no eye contact, and neither did the woman next to him. They simply stared ahead. The man's hands on the wheel with blank expressions. The part that fucked me up was the daughter around 8 years old in the back seat. She was carrying on frantically, like shouting silently and point to down the road, trying to mouth me something, but I suck at lip reading. Whatever she was saying, it made me terribly uneasy, and as I kept watching the car pass me in slow motion, I looked at the parents again, and the father and mother had turned to look at me with pressed together lips, smiling widely, and their eyes stretched way bigger than they should stretch. My back broke out in goosebumps, and I almost pissed myself at this image. The little girl was now laughing hysterically at me, at flipping me off with both fingers. Then the car was past me, and I could only see the canopy. I knew they were all watching me in the mirrors. The girl probably turned around in her back seat just to show me the fingers some more through the back window. I stood there for a while. The first and last time I stopped running throughout that whole day. I couldn't believe what the fuck just happened. I wanted to turn around then and there, but I thought I'd rather not head in the direction where they're going, so I kept forward. I was walking now, unable to shake the images of those people in my mind. I was utterly scared and talking to myself, not knowing what's going to happen out here. I took my water and drank some. When I put it back and looked forward on the straight, I could see a figure about 2 kilometers ahead of me. Jogging at a casual pace, hoodie on over their head. The fear I felt in that moment is indescribable. I wanted to die and at least make it quick compared to whatever it was what was happening to me panned out to be. I was walking, still trying not to keep up, but he was slowing down, I noticed, and so eventually I'd be side by side with this thing. Something inside me came back out, fight or flight, they say, so I considered my options. I'm screwed either way. I thought to myself, this guy has made a mistake, thinking he can take me on these rounds. I thought to myself, Bud, I'm going to run you into the ground. That's when I tightened my pack, put my bottle inside the bag, and crossed the street. When I got across, I could almost see the side of its face, but I was a bit too far. I started running. Good at first as I caught up in my heart, adrenaline, anger, and fear all combined into a sour ball of an intoxicating drug. I rushed forward, sprinting like a prey from a predator. I flew past him, leaving dust behind me. I didn't take the time to look at his face out of fear of losing my game while going past, and also because I could feel that face looking at me but not looking. Just that hooded face with its everlasting smile of sharp teeth turning with me as I came past and went forward, and probably kept with me all the while. I could keep this up for some time, but there was still the unanswered question. How the hell did Mr. Shark Teeth get by me all the way to this side of the road? It made me feel defeated, but like I had lost already, and he's just playing with his food, basically. I wanted to slack, but I thought if I did that, I'd have no chances at all. As long as I kept moving, I can survive. After some distance, I slacked a little, still jogging but keeping my energy. I risked a glance behind me to find the single most terrifying face, not a kilometer behind me, right fucking on top of me. He was literally 5 meters away, grinning away. Pale white skin, broken pieces of glass for teeth it seemed, and the hood covering the eyes I would never want to see. This scared me. I started peeing. My bladder just gave and I pissed myself while my legs kept running on autopilot mode, and my brain trying to understand what my eyes are seeing. He measured up against me. Side by side we jogged and I kept looking at him. My face stuck to those teeth, too scared to move except my legs. After a while I couldn't slow down or pick up pace out of fear of the unknown. I just kept right next to him, or it, looking forward now. His face was turned to me, and if I had a full bladder, I'd probably had gone again. From down the throat, I could hear him not breathing while running but whispers. His lips were wrapped tightly to the outside of the gums, but the whispers he made inches from my ear while running next to me made my skin crawl and goosebumps filled my skin all over. The voices came from deep inside its throat, not saying anything I could understand or hear properly. After running almost 10 kilometers with this thing at my side, the sun was going down and I would have been on my way back already, but that's when it said something. Not in any kind of voice I've ever heard, but to put it in example, I'd say it sounded like speaking while snorting like a pig simultaneously on every word. It said, "I'm going to rip your head off and eat your eyes out of your skull." Then I asked, "What does it want?" It said, "To play a game." It said game, drawing it out like in a teasing, mocking way. I said, "Okay, what game?" Then it replied, "Whoever gets to the crossing at the town ahead first wins." Neither of us spoke again. It was dark and we were still at it. I knew if I lost, it would kill me and probably fulfill its whispered truths. When I saw the crossing up ahead, I sped up, almost sprinting, but so did he. I was getting tired and this thing had seemingly untapped amounts of energy. Just when I thought of getting over the fences and into the farmlands, a sudden loud thud came from my side like a bag of potatoes hitting the ground. A beastly shape flew out in front of me in the dark. I could see well in the stars and moon. It was an enormous, fully grown deer that had knocked Mr. Sharky to the ground, and probably broke his neck because I looked around and he wasn't moving. I sprinted to the end of the road and made a left to another direction that would eventually lead me home. Somewhere along the way, some farmer stopped and asked me why I was out here all by myself. I couldn't say anything because I'd seemed crazy, and all I wanted was a ride at that point. They put me in back and drove me home where I got to tell my parents everything. Screw running and small towns. I'm heading back to the city. I guess to really understand the problem, I need to take you back. My wife and I have a love story, the likes of which are only heard of in novels. In real life, no one meets their soulmate in third grade. No one sets out to love that person on sight and simply doesn't. No one still loves that same person from the third grade after decades have come and gone, and they've become old and gray. Except, that's exactly the story of my wife and me. Even though we've reached our 70s by now, in my mind's eye, I still recall the first time I saw her. She wore a yellow dress with frilly sleeves and white Mary Janes. Her golden hair was tied up in pigtails with long yellow ribbons to match her dress. I'd shyly asked if I could take the seat next to her. She'd giggled delightedly in response. Her rosy, freckled cheeks glowed and her sweet blue eyes sparkled. She was always like that, ready to laugh even on the worst of days. We were fast friends from that moment on. We married just as soon as we were out of high school, and we had our first little one just shy of a year later. My Lucy kept that same happy way, and those same sparkling eyes day after day, year after year. We had the lean years most couples back then had, where every penny had to be stretched to feed the little mouths that kept coming. Four in all by the time we finished. Our oldest, a son, next a daughter, and then twin girls. Even with the weariness of motherhood, especially when the youngsters were small, Lucy never lost the light. She was only in her 30s when she lost both her parents unexpectedly to a terrible car accident on a snowy night. Sure, the tragedy took the wind out of Lucy's sails for a time, but she always said her mama and daddy wouldn't want her to live her life sad. Then, in 91, our boy Trevor, he was 27. Man, hang on a minute. It's hard to talk about without getting choked up. Well, he was an accomplished soldier by then, and well, the Gulf War happened. And Trevor didn't come back. We'll just say that. Sometimes I think that took more of a toll on Lucy than she let on. I mean, she was down for a good while when it happened, but of course she still had the three girls after all. It was always Lucy's way to never let them see her cry. She felt like she was on this earth to dry their tears, not for them to see her weak moments. So, on the surface, she seemed like she took it well, but yeah, I think it's fair to say she never could let that go. She was still my wonderful, beautiful Lucy, but maybe a more pale version, like a beautiful piece of art that fades a little bit as time goes on. But then, the years rolled on. Lucy blossomed as a granny. The first grandchild was a boy born in 1992, and they named him Trevor, so that's nice. Next came Lucy May, and then a whole slew of grandbabies for around about the next 10 years. Later there even came great-grandkids aplenty. Lucy had planned on taking on a job after the last daughter struck out on her own, to have something to do, but she fell so in love with the job of being a granny that she never did wind up doing it. She was just that granny, the one that was always there, babysitting, weekend overnights, games, crafts, snacks, favorite meals, visiting their classrooms. It went on like that for a long time, a lot of really happy years. The first thing that really hit my Lucy hard, the thing that really set her back, the thing that began to truly chip away at my love was the diagnosis. Dementia. It started out with just a lot more forgetfulness than usual. Lucy always joked about her senior moments, and hey, we didn't think a lot of it at the time. After all, we were both 76 by the time. Very few of us get to remain just as sharp as a tack as we get older and older, do we now? She started to mess up her words sometimes. She'd ask for her clippers, but what she meant was her glasses. Or she'd want me to start her laundry, but she actually meant that she wanted me to start the bath for her. The Lucy she once was would have found the ensuing confusion from these word flubs hysterical, but this changing Lucy would get more confused and then get upset. She would cry at the drop of a hat over it, and then she would get angry, angrier every time it happened, until finally there was an incident where she screamed at me and grabbed a knife off the counter. She told me to make sure I paid the heat bill, which I did upon her request. But the next day, she came to me furious because the rubbish was under the carport and not out at the curb. "I'm sorry, dear. I forgot the day," I told her. I gave her what I hoped was a dazzling smile. For an old guy. Senior moment, I guess. Lucy fumed. Her pupils were like saucers. You couldn't even see the blue in her eyes. Her skin was practically gray, as though she was so angry that she was freezing. "I reminded you yesterday, Clifford," she seethed. I recounted in my mind, trying to recall her reminding me, but I couldn't. It didn't mean she didn't, just meant I must have forgot. "I'm sorry, love. I must have not heard you, maybe." Lucy grimaced, gritting her teeth so hard I worried they would break. "Clifford, I said to you, don't forget to pay the heat bill, and you told me that you would." I blinked and watched her for a few seconds, hoping she'd collect herself and calm down. I'd frankly never seen her this angry in all our years together. "Yes, Lucy, I did pay the heat bill. Are we talking about the heat bill or the rubbish not going out for collection?" Her chest rose and fell as she took quick, shallow breaths, and her eyes darted here, there, and everywhere. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "The heat bill. You forgot to take it out to the curb." We were standing in our galley kitchen, and I'll never forget her sweet face that day, so frightened and confused. "You said you would, Clifford." Lucy cried, beginning to sob. I wanted to reach for her and fold her into my arms, but electricity seemed to be shooting off her. I feared that if I touched her, she might break down. "I'm sorry, Lucy," I said softly. "I will take the heat bill to the dump so that it doesn't back up before next week. All right, love?" Lucy cried pitifully. Wailed, actually. "You said you would," she screamed. Her voice was shrill and breaking, like the old witches of fairy tales, not like my sweet Lucy. I did reach for her then, but she snatched up the little paring knife on the counter and lashed it around at me before dropping it and sliding down to the floor inconsolable. I got down on the floor with her and pulled her to me then, stroking her hair and kissing the top of her head. I told her I loved her. I held her till she felt better, and then she apologized and said she didn't know what came over her. I asked her if she wanted to go lay down and have a nap, and she thought that might be a good idea. You're probably thinking I should have taken her to the doctor straight away, right then. And you're right. But I was scared, if I'm being honest. Fear is irrational, so I talked myself out of admitting anything was wrong. But a week later, I had no choice. She kissed me goodbye and grabbed her pocketbook and keys one rainy afternoon. She was heading out to take one of the granddaughters shopping. I was reading a book by the window, about to doze off from the comfort of the gloomy sky and pattering rain. I barely took notice of her leaving other than to kiss her and send her off with my love. And then I did fall asleep. It was only about a half hour later that my cell phone rang and snapped me out of pleasant dreams. I saw that it was our daughter, Deanna, and picked up. "Hey, Pop, I thought Mommy was coming to pick up Ashley." I drew my phone back to see the time and saw that more than enough time had passed for her to have arrived at Deanna's place. "Yeah, babe," I told her. "She headed your way about a half hour or so ago. Did you call her?" "Yes," Deanna said, worry scarring her pleasant voice. "She's not answering." I broke out in a sweat. "Okay," I said, getting out of my seat and scrambling to grab my keys, which I had left on the end table. "I'm gonna head out and look for her. Call me if you hear from her first." "Okay, Pop," Deanna agreed, sounding near tears as she ended the call. As soon as I threw open the front door to head out into the driveway and hop in the car, I discovered my wife standing there. The lady who lived down the street, Frida, I think her name was, had her arm around Lucy. Lucy was sobbing and they were both soaked. "Sweetheart," I cried. A loud roll of thunder punctuated my exclamation, and Lucy jumped as if in terror. I reached out for her and she recoiled. Near tears myself, I motioned wildly for them to come in and stepped back. Clifford, something's wrong, Frida said, her face deeply creased with worry as she gently pulled Lucy inside. My heart shattered as Lucy wailed and struggled, not wanting to come inside. Frida and I managed to get her out of the rain. She stood in the foyer wringing wet and mewling. I cupped her freezing cold cheeks. Sweetheart, I whispered. I found her wandering around crying. She looked so lost. Frida cried. When I went to ask her if she was okay, she doesn't know me, Clifford. What's wrong? I fumbled in my pocket for my phone and shoved it at Frida as I attempted to soothe my wife. Can you please call my daughter Deanna? Tell her she's home and under the weather. Frida looked mightily disgusted to be asked to downplay the situation to my daughter, and probably also because I failed to address what she'd said. Instead, I wrapped Lucy in my arms. It killed me that she struggled as I pulled her shivering body against me. Oh, my love, my darling, I began to croon softly, singing into her wet silver hair. I've hungered for your touch a long, lonely time. Her small frame relaxed slightly as I sang, and I was alarmed at just how frail and tiny she'd somehow become, right under my nose. Time goes by so slowly. Frida had ended the call with Deanna, and I saw her cross her arms over her chest and watch as I sang to and held my wife. And time can do so much, I sang, my voice heavy with emotion. By the time I finished our beloved song, she had calmed down and wasn't crying anymore. When I finally let her go, she smiled up at me flirtatiously. Well, that was lovely, Clifford. Thank you. Then she startled, seeming to notice for the first time that Frida was there. Frida, how lovely to see you, dear. You were just soaked. Won't you come in for some coffee? Frida and I exchanged a glance. Together, she and I managed to convince Lucy to lay down for a nap, and we helped her out of her wet clothes and into comfortable pajamas. Lucy fell asleep as soon as we helped her into bed, and Frida and I quietly shut her in the bedroom. Clifford? Frida asked in a hushed, urgent voice. What in the world is going on? I had no idea Lucy was sick. I frowned and snapped at her. What are you talking about? She's not sick. The old biddy was raising my hackles. All the old bats in this neighborhood like to gossip and dramatize except for my Lucy. Frida's jaw dropped. Clifford? She gasped. Are you telling me you've not had her to the doctor? Oh my God. You must get her into the doctor. Today. It's an emergency. I was just about to argue and ask her just exactly how she'd come by my soaking wet wife when Lucy had left in a car, but the doorbell rang. Both of us flinched at the noise, not wanting Lucy to wake. I hurried to the door and Frida followed right behind as if she lived there or something. She sure was awfully comfortable all of a sudden. It was a cop at the door. He asked if this was the home of Lucy Thurston, and I told him yes, it was. And you're Mr. Thurston, I assume? He asked. Yes, what's this about? I demanded impatiently. The cop regarded Frida. Are you Lucy Thurston? No, my wife's laying down for a nap. She isn't feeling well, I barked. He nodded. I see, well, are you aware that Mrs. Thurston was involved in a car accident? Oh my God, Frida cried. I felt like tossing her right back out in the rain. Let the cat drag her in somewhere else. Maybe she'd hit her head. Maybe this was going to explain the confusion. But the cop went on to explain she'd had a minor fender bender when her car left the road and struck a fire hydrant. The car was even still drivable, but had been towed since Mrs. Thurston had apparently left the scene. He asked me if she was hurt in any way, and I said I didn't think so. Sir, leaving the roadway and striking a hydrant, and then leaving the scene, well, the cop explained diplomatically. These are offenses that are against the law. Frida let out a wicked level harumph and then shoved past me like I wasn't even there. She pushed out the storm door, took the cop by the arm, and pulled him up the walk a little ways so that once the storm door shut, I couldn't hear them. I watched her flail and yap for a good long while, long enough for the poor cop to start to get as soaked as she already was, but after a while, he tipped his hat to her and left. She came back inside and handed me a yellow slip of paper. Here's the info to get her car back. Pay the tow bill and be on your merry way. I felt a little less inclined to throw old Frida out in the rain, and I told her thank you. She invited herself in for the coffee Lucy had offered, and we sat at the kitchen table. I'm not proud to admit, I fell apart a little that day because I knew what was coming. Only an idiot couldn't see it, and Frida was a good friend. In fact, she stayed until Lucy got up. Then she helped me get her to the ER. Once they saw Lucy in triage, they started paperwork to admit her, and Frida took me to pick up Lucy's car. Once again out in the rain, Frida patted my arm comfortingly. Want me to come back to the hospital? Wait it out with you? I smiled weakly and gave Frida a hug. I'd never expected to make close friends with this lady I'd only vaguely known before that awful day. No, you go on home. It's getting late. I'll call you and fill you in later. She nodded and got in her car. I stood there in the rain, in the empty parking lot of the impound lot, and didn't get in Lucy's car until Frida's taillights were good and gone. It was 2 days in the hospital, endless tests, and a stream of doctors, and the diagnosis came. Dementia. By the time they told us for certain, I had already come to terms with it. I was happy it wasn't Alzheimer's, which I feared could be worse. In the end, it didn't matter, I suppose. At first, the family came together to rally around Lucy, and she received the diagnosis with her usual good cheer. After all, her episodes were few and far between, so she thought it wouldn't even affect her life that much. But it was only a week out of the hospital before there was another incident, and this one really changed things. Lucy was babysitting our youngest great-granddaughters that day, Eliza. Eliza was 10, and her mother and father were going out of town for the night, so Lucy was to stay the night at their house with Eliza. I had offered to go too, but she insisted on some girl time with Eliza. Lucy's mood and personality had been so normal and happy-go-lucky that day, and for days leading up to it, that I didn't think a thing of it. Eliza would later say that she had no idea what triggered Lucy's episode. They had been in the car on the freeway, coming back from the shopping mall, and Eliza told us that she'd simply been talking about kids at school, and she remarked that a certain child was a dummy. That's when all hell broke loose. Lucy began shrieking at Eliza, cursing at her, calling her terrible names. The car veered all over the road, causing a chorus of honking and squealing tires as other angry drivers narrowly missed getting out of Lucy's way and being struck. Eliza reported that her grandmother had begun punching her and shoving her up against the door, and then struggling to reach across Eliza and attempting to open the door as the car barreled down the freeway, with Eliza sobbing and hysterical, and Lucy furious and out of control, and other motorists around them making phone calls to 911. The car was finally stopped when a state highway patrol officer pulled them over. Eliza told us that Lucy immediately snapped out of her rage and became scared and confused. She stood outside her car with her head in her hands, weeping. Eliza was also inconsolable and simply wanted to make up with her grandmother. but Lucy didn't know who she was. Fortunately, no one was hurt from the whole horrible ordeal. At least not physically, and the cop took pity on Lucy. She was charged with the lowest traffic offenses possible, and I was able to just pay the fines and put it all behind us. Obviously, the occurrence caused many, many problems, not the least of which was terrible trauma to Eliza. But the worst thing for Lucy was that the whole family and I unanimously agreed that it was time for Lucy to stop driving, and that she couldn't be unattended anymore, especially with the children. Lucy was furious when she was lucid, and frightened when she wasn't because she wanted to leave and couldn't. She fought the change so hard that I just sold her car to prevent her from driving it. When she downloaded the Uber app and started trying to escape by calling Ubers, I had to confiscate her phone as well. At first, it wasn't like I was cutting her off from the outside world because the kids and grands would come around constantly to try and make her feel loved and not let her get lonely. But Lucy blamed them as much as me for what she saw as isolating her. We began to talk in whispers and secret texts of a long-term facility. Her doctor stayed in the loop and tried to help us through this awful phase of life as much as possible. The thing was, I couldn't wrap my head around placing Lucy in a home. I think I really would have rather died than abandoned my wife like that. I know it's not really abandoning someone to do that. It's simply giving them the care they need. But to me, it felt like I'd be abandoning her, even if I went there and spent every single day with her. Plus, you always hear horror stories of people like Lucy getting exponentially worse, and when they go into assisted living. Day by day, Lucy's episodes of incoherence increased, and visits from the kids and grands decreased. They knew she didn't mean it when she told them she hated them and to stay away. But it was such a tough spot for them to be in because they felt like their presence was only hurting Lucy. Our kind neighbor Frida stopped coming as well, at my request. She instead checked in by texting me and leaving with the promise that I could call her any time if I needed help. I needed so much help, but I accepted none. Our contact with the outside world dwindled down to nothing. It came to where my phone was kept shut off and shoved into the back of a drawer in the kitchen. Lucy's bright eyes faded. Her hair turned completely white and began to thin out, all in a matter of weeks. She stopped eating like she should, and her face thinned out and her tiny body became even lighter and weaker. In the back of my mind, I would think of dementia patients eventually losing the ability to eat, but I continued on each day, ignoring my wife's unraveling. The day her first tooth fell out, she began to leave dead things around the house. The dentist said the tooth had been infected and had been falling out on its own, but there had been so much blood. When she walked out of the bathroom, blood flowed down her chin and she grinned, with one of her top front teeth missing. She cackled like an old witch, and I leapt from the recliner to go to her and see what was wrong with her. She didn't even appear to know she was bleeding or understand why I was so upset. But even after I got her to the dentist, I believe she pulled that tooth out, and it was late that night, after things had cooled off, that I discovered the little skull. I had slipped out of bed late that night, leaving her there asleep to use the John. I noticed it as soon as I flipped on the light and walked into the bathroom. I went straight to it and picked it up. It was a tiny skull, polished and smooth. I picked it up to examine it closer to see if it was even real, or perhaps some sort of weird custom jewelry. But it was real, and it appeared to be something tiny like a mouse. I had no idea where it came from. Soon, I found a dead spider, placed on a piece of bread in the refrigerator. It was an alarmingly large and fuzzy black spider. Lucy was sitting watching the television with blank, glassy eyes when I found the spider. Next came a dead bird. This was placed inside a pot of stew I had in the Dutch oven on the stove when I made the mistake of leaving it unattended to go to the bathroom. Lucy had been reclined and reading a book, lost to the world, when I discovered the bird and dumped the stew in the trash. Then there was a dead rabbit in the basement. This one was even more disturbing as it was gutted, with its putrid remains spilling out. Its dead smell permeated the dark and damp basement, and it was extra disturbing because it had probably been killed specifically to be left here. I didn't even know how or when she was managing to do this, but I was distraught. That's when I stopped taking her to the doctors. I was still checking in with our children enough to keep them at bay, but I didn't tell them about the dead things, and I didn't tell them I was afraid to take her to the doctor. You see, I knew it was time to commit, Lucy, but I couldn't bear it. I could not bear it, and I knew that the doctors would eventually take it out of my hands. So I told them that I was transferring her to new doctors and arranged for her records to be transferred to a new doctor, but I have yet to take her. Yes, I am aware that they will eventually catch on to this scheme, and I will figure something out. But luckily the wheels of the big machine turn slowly, and it is easy in American healthcare for one little old lady to slip through the cracks. The day that I found the dead rat in the shower, its guts and blood swirling in the drain, I finally confronted Lucy about it. I began to cry and I went to where I'd seated her, right outside the bathroom in our bedroom. I took her hand and had to basically drag her into the bathroom. She was instantly furious to have me pulling her, and I was really losing it myself. "Why?" I yelled. It wasn't really a mean sort of yell, but more a hoarse plea. "Why would you do this? How are you doing this?" Lucy screamed and scrambled back when she saw the rat. She threw herself against me and practically climbed my body to get away from it. "How did that get in here? Get it out! Get it out!" Lucy shrieked. I took her out of the bathroom and placed her onto our bed where she curled up into a ball and began whispering incoherent words to herself. I too collapsed onto our bed. I put my hands over my face and cried and cried. I sobbed until there wasn't a shred of energy left in me, and then I slept. It was a dark day. It was my darkest day ever in my life. Since then, Lucy has completely deteriorated. From everything I've told you, you were probably thinking that she had already deteriorated. But no. Now she is an entirely different person. Her skin is pale gray. What hairs she has yet, she tears out. She sits in an armchair and winds it strand by strand around her finger and yanks it out. She flinches and then laughs at each little strand coming out. If I try to get her to stop that, then she claws at her face. Lucy's beautiful face is covered in raw, bloody scratches. She roams naked at night and throws up in the hallways. I have managed to get the kids to stay away and stop calling by begging them to give us some time, and telling them Lucy is sad and embarrassed and wants to be left alone for a little while. Frida showed up in person when I stopped answering her texts, and I told her that Lucy had moved into assisted living. "Oh?" Frida asked, looking confused. "Which one? I'd like to go see her." "She doesn't want visitors," I told her coldly. Frida frowned sadly. "Oh, well, I understand. I'd at least like to send a care package. Which home is she in, Clifford?" Frida asked, studying my face. I shut the door quietly. It feels like my world is closing in. I absolutely know that eventually someone will come in and I will not be able to hide what is happening here. And my love, my Lucy, she's all but gone. But I still can't seem to do anything but stay here inside the walls of the home we've shared for so many years that now seems like a prison. Right now, Lucy is screaming. She's in our bedroom. The door is closed. and I'm trying to ignore her. That's why I'm writing this. I need to get it out. She's crying like a wild animal and she screams like she's in physical pain. And she keeps saying, "Clifford, why are we all alone? Why are we all alone?" Lucy is in the bedroom screaming and crying because that's where I have tied her up and left her. My heart is pounding. I know that if you read this, you'll be thinking by now that I am a monster. You might understand on some level, but you will still have turned against me at this point. You'll be thinking that I've crossed a line and it's indefensible. She came at me with a knife. That's why I tied her up. She'll quiet down soon anyway. I know that's not enough information for you to be less furious with me for tying up my disabled wife and shutting her up alone in our room. Even less so when I tell you that the reason she came at me with a knife is because she was begging and pleading with me to let her have my phone so she could call our daughters. She missed them so bitterly. She didn't understand why I couldn't call them and she attacked me with a knife. I have a superficial stab wound on my shoulder, so I tied her up to figure out what to do. You see, even if I do call the girls, even if I ask them to come over and see their mother, they won't see her. At least not in the way they'd want to. No, not in the way anybody would want to. Because their mother is dead. The day of the rat in the shower, the day that I cried myself to sleep next to Lucy, I woke to find her missing. I bolted upright, confused and frightened, looking all around. I ran about the house looking for her and calling for her. My search eventually led me to the basement where I saw the single worst thing I've ever seen. My Lucy sprawled naked on the floor, her eyes gouged out, apparently by her own fingers, which were bloody and covered in the carnage from her face. And then, after clawing out her own eyes, she had plunged a knife into her feebly bony chest, and she'd lain there dying on the floor while I slept upstairs. I stumbled backward and fled the basement, locking the door at the top of the steps before slamming it shut. My mind reeled. I felt my sanity slipping. Actually felt myself losing it. But then I heard her voice. I followed the sound of it and found her in bed asking me for water. I've never had a migraine before, but I got one then. When I walked in that room and saw her tiny form tucked into the bed, gray, decrepit, with lifeless, dull eyes, I told her I'd get her a glass of water from the kitchen. Then I forced myself to go back into the basement and sure enough, she was still there on the dirty stone floor, still laying there in a grisly, horrific manner. Lucy killed herself and then she came back, and she doesn't know she died. I sealed the basement door shut with padlocks that night, and now it's been 1 week. The smell is terrible, but believe it or not, since she's down in the basement, it's not as terrible as you'd think. It has yet to draw the attention of the neighbors, but Lucy has started to complain about it. The Lucy that I knew is all but gone. Her ghost is angry and vicious when she appears. She elicits strings of profanity, the likes of which I've never heard. She tells me that she hates me and details all the gruesome ways she wishes that I would die. She asks me constantly why we are here all alone. Then sometimes she vanishes and I get peace for a while. I know that it's only a matter of time before someone comes. I know that there may be some legal repercussions for my part in all that's happened here. I know that the kids and the grands will all have to find out the horrible news that their grandmother killed herself. I know I will have to tell them, but I can't seem to care about any of that. I can't seem to think about anything but one thing. How do I tell Lucy? Do you know? How do I tell my angry and terrified wife that she's dead? There is one memory that plagues my childhood. It is so vivid, so clear, so chilling that it whines in the ear like tinnitus. Gone for most of the day until the dead of night when you have nothing but the silence of the night to accompany you. The memory drowns out all other recollections of lazy days listening to Walkman staring out at rainy weather, or movies, or school. The memory was when I was very young. I remember that we had gone to the store for my school supplies for the first time after moving to Seattle, so I should have just turned 7. My mother had gotten distracted by some other sections to stock up our new residence, so she let me run off to gather my own school supplies. With a few spiral brown notebooks and a pack of crayons in hand, I toddled back to where I had last seen my mother. The young me saw the figure of a woman in gray from behind, who then held out her hand, and I dutifully put my own little hand into it. She held on and without saying a word turned and began walking out of the store with me in tow. Perhaps I could sense something was wrong, as not a single word was uttered, nor a glance thrown at me, or the things that I now held. The figure that held my hand simply strode towards the exit in a confident manner. I started to leg, my little sneakers skipping off the tiled floor as I tried to pull my hand out of hers. But the hand holding mine turned into a vice grip, and the strides became more frantic. I tried to call out, but fear turned what should have been a scream into a whimper or a mumble. The cashier that we had passed was the one who yelled out. Perhaps the sharp-eyed lady had noticed the unpaid items in my hand, or perhaps my body language was simply too unmistakable for mothers who had their own children. Its cover blown, the figure broke into a full sprint, charging forward and dragging me along. Behind me the cashier had caught up, and with a mutual fury, shared by all people, latched onto me, pulling me back from the figure. For a moment, it felt like my shoulders would separate, but the second she stopped moving, the figure let go and took off outside in a sprint. Never once during all of this did the figure ever turn their head to look back at either of us. The police were called, and I remembered my elbow had actually been dislocated at the radius, needing a doctor to pull it back into place. I still remembered my mother coming back to the store with the detective, who had made an appointment with the owner to review the tapes. The detective hoped that the person who had made such a seemingly targeted attempt might be recognized by my mother, and my mother, who had been holding me crying all night before, was now completely unwilling to leave me alone if she could help it. When the video played, I was in the back being distracted by the detective's partner. That didn't stop me from taking a peek at the video. They paused on the only few frames that captured the figure's face. Eyes that were far too close together, a nose that seemed crudely stuck on like Play-Doh, a mouth that was only a half-heartedly etched in, like an afterthought. These were the traits that I could make out. The detective just sighed and blamed the old videotape for artifacting. I couldn't forget it. The second time it happened, I was at home alone for a school holiday that my mom didn't get off from her job at the hotel. I was upstairs mixing Legos and Bionicles when I heard the door rattle and click. In her tone and voice, although muffled by my closed door, I heard what sounded like, "Come down." In the condo where we lived, I could see the door from the stairs, and from that distance I could see her face. Nothing seemed out of place to me, but at that point I had a light case of nearsightedness that hadn't yet gotten bad enough to warrant a visit to the optometrist. I thought nothing of it as I started down the stairs to greet her. That's when the figure gestured casually, like throwing her hand behind her shoulder as if to say, "Come with me, outside." I got close enough to focus on her face, and that's when my fear instinct from before kicked in. Why wasn't she saying anything? The expression, the eyes open just a little too wide, the smile just a little too sardonic. Our minds are sensitive to micro-expressions, and even without processing those details consciously, I froze on the steps and felt my bowel drop. A tense moment filled the air as both of us stayed unmoving, while I tried desperately to figure out what to do. Suddenly, both of us exploded into motion as I decided on pushing off the stairs with maximal effort while the figure in front of me lunged forward, grabbing my ankles. The hand brushed up against my heel, but some frantic kicks ensured that I wasn't grabbed. The back of my waist hit the stairs hard, but at this point the adrenaline had dulled any semblance of pain. I scrambled back up the stairs, grabbing the railing to turn towards my room. Hearing stomps and feeling the wind of the figure that had recovered from her lunge and was chasing behind me. My door was open only a foot wide. With practiced ease, I slipped past the opening and slammed it shut with my palm on the doorknob, simultaneously pushing the locking button closed. Angry, furious kicks and punches rained down on the door, that inch and a half of plywood separating me from what seemed like certain doom. I screamed. After a few seconds of trying, I saw 10 fingers curl up from underneath the crack of the door, making scratch marks on the white paint and not even caring for the cracks and blood that resulted as it did so. Seeing that it was futile, the fingers retracted and it went back to furious banging, straining the door, and then it stopped. The shadows from the bottom make it clear it had moved away. I looked at the window behind me, dreading the moment I would see the facsimile of my mother's face pop into the window with those wide eyes and that rictus grin. It never came. The police came instead, knocking on the door and asking me to open it. I just cried on the other side of it. Evidently, the family attached to the condo had hired a babysitter, and the cacophony generated by the pounding and screaming caused her to call for help. A locksmith was called and the bedroom door was unlocked. The police had gotten my mother back from work and detectives were taking pictures of the damages to the door and the scratches on the bottom of it. Nobody told me anything. I grew frustrated, but wasn't in the mood to say anything. The only snippet I caught was a fragment of hushed discussion between my mother and the detective. The word sister. Did I have a twin aunt that I had not been told about? Was that who was going after me? Weeks later, I was still not told anything. I subconsciously grew more distant, almost flinching when my mother came into the room. It hurt her, I know, but she wouldn't answer any of my questions. I was frustrated. I know the door was unlocked with a key. The sound I heard and the detective confirmed as much. The fact that somehow a key had ended up with who I assumed was her insane sister, and I wasn't being informed really betrayed me. What happened merely weeks later changed my mind about the situation. Winter break with friends in the neighborhood that went to the same high school helped me keep my mind off of things. We played like we were younger, agreeing to stay out of our houses and away from video games to be outside building snow forts, having snowball fights and exploring. Like any other day, we decided to play hide and seek. I felt safe with such a big group. The seeker counted down and we started running. Leah, one of the girls in the area, had suddenly popped up behind me. I suppose she had been late and walked on towards the end of the rules session. I had gotten along well with her before, so I followed her as we ran in the streets covered by winter while the white fog of our breaths billowed out before us. We started getting farther, and a sense of unease started to creep into me as the sounds around me dropped away. Leah seemed like she knew exactly where she wanted to go as she pointed to an alley behind the fence of a house in the neighborhood. "Here," she chirped out. It sounded like a bird's voice. This made me freeze. Try as I might to bury it in my heart, my recent experience was still in my mind. My feet refused to move as I watched her figure disappear just behind the wooden fence, right out of sight. "Come." I refused to move, instead circling to the other side of the fence. My heart was pounding up to my throat. My ears felt stuffy, and I don't think I would have been able to hear any sounds had they happened. Part of me knew the game was up, and that no matter what I would be running. but another part of me held instead anger. I wanted to see, and the gaps in the wooden stakes offered me that opportunity. As we stayed in a deadlock, two hands wrapped in purple mittens jumped up and grabbed the top of the wooden fence. It shocked me into motion, and I began sprinting back the way I came, faster than I had ever run in my life. I tried to listen hard for the sound of footsteps in the snow behind me, but there was nothing. My mind imagined the possibility of a hand grabbing my hood and yanking me back by the neck at any point, but it never came. I didn't even turn back to look. Soon I found another piece that had been trying to hide behind the bushes. They were obviously alarmed by the fact I had been sprinting toward where we had just left. I was relieved to see somebody else. I thought carefully about what I wanted to say. "You guys saw Leah earlier with us, yeah? She was wearing a teal winter coat?" I asked. "Yeah, she ran off with you, right?" They answered. "Right. I completely lost track of her and we were supposed to stay together. I couldn't reach her by phone and I'm kind of worried she's missing. Can we stop for a moment and give her a call?" A blatant lie, but I wasn't about to start with my history of being abducted. They called her. I held my breath since I hadn't actually tried. No answer. We quickly canceled the game and got our group back together. I felt more safe now with our friends milling about. I was asked some questions about where I last saw Leah. I gave some vague answers, not hoping to go back to the house where I had the last encounter. Eventually, we decided to go knock on the door, thinking that she might have gone home for some reason, or if not, we could at least inform her parents. When we arrived and knocked, there was no answer. "Are you kids looking for Leah?" Leah's elderly neighbor poked her head out her door to ask. "Yes, ma'am," we answered. "She and her family left early this morning to go on a ski trip. They won't be back until next week. Come see her when she's back." Such a sweet old lady, but the news she gave us happily made our hearts chill. All of us. Because almost all of us saw Leah with the group. They knew something was wrong, and I was no longer invited. Not that I had any objections. I was busy hiding out at home, panicking now that I realized anyone could come after me. For the rest of high school, I tried to interrogate my mother on the question of our family. Who were my grandparents? Who was my father? Did I have any other relatives? Every question was met with what I interpreted as excuses and dodges. She was an orphan and I didn't have any grandparents. I was an IVF baby, and she couldn't contact my biological father. I grew more paranoid and alone, but at least nothing else happened for the rest of high school. A year after I left for college was when my mother fell ill. When I visited the hospital, I was told quarantine was in full effect. Nobody was allowed contact, no matter how dire the situation was. The physician managing my mother's care came to speak to me. "Could we step into this room for a second?" He pointed at the Serenity room behind me. Obviously, having been prepared beforehand. Unfortunately, all I saw of it was the sinister darkness of the room and not its inviting privacy. "I'd like to stay here, please," I answered. "Are you sure? I'd really rather have this talk in private." My response was unexpected. "I don't follow anyone anywhere alone," I responded. "I understand. Well, I have to give difficult news. We are not optimistic about her care. We'll try our very best, but you should start preparing and look into these options I have in the pamphlet here." I started roughly tuning out the rest he had to say. I could only look through the port of the glass at my mother that was on a breathing machine, unconscious, pale, and thin. After all these years, I feel like somewhere deep down inside I loved her and appreciated that she tried her best. But some part of me never forgave her for her secrets. I went back to the house and began to sort through our legal documents to get what the pamphlet said I had to prepare. Then in the back I found my birth certificate. My full name, my SSN, place of birth, healthy male, 6.5 pounds, and twin. Twin? I was a twin? What happened to my sibling then? I made a call to the IVF clinics servicing the city listed on the certificate, as well as the hospital. No dice. Even with the limited information they were allowed to give me, I could tell by their voices they had no clue about my mother and no records of me. The hospital. Most of the people working there had changed, but there were still a few old obstetricians that might have been there at the time, though they weren't in at that moment and I had to call back. I was getting desperate. I got back to the hospital and got a hold of the physician I spoke to earlier. I need to see my mother. I pleaded with him. I'm so sorry, but please? I pulled out my birth certificate. This says that I have a sibling out there somewhere. Mom never mentioned that. I want to know what happened to them. This might be my only remaining relative in the world and she's the only person who knows. Please let me ask her this. I'm so sorry, but she had just passed away less than an hour ago. We had been trying to call you in to view her body one last time and gather her effects. I was crushed. I got home and looked through the last few things my mother had on her person before she had left this earth. Among them was the locket she had always worn, a simple brass thing that I had played around with sometimes as a child when she let me. I could never get it to open, and she told me that it didn't, and I never questioned it. When I held it in my hands close to my face, it seemed to pop open the moment my breath hit the lock. Inside was a 4-leaf clover that had long withered and desiccated. The obstetrician called back. After a brief conversation, he informed me that he wasn't responsible for delivering me, but at the time an unknown male whom others had assumed was my mother's husband had been in the room for the birth, and had simply walked away with one of the children. The hospital had gotten severely reprimanded, but after an investigation turned up nothing, the case went unsolved. And that's it. My questions had hit a dead end. There's nothing else for me to ask, nothing else for me to pursue. My mother had taken any answers for me and left for good. All I have is the remains of a 4-leaf clover and no answers to any questions. The neighborhood has gotten awfully quiet. The house is even more so now that I'm the only one inside it. Every figure that passes by outside makes me jump, and I swear I can see 2 silhouettes at night standing motionless. I convince myself that they're bushes or trash cans, but those spots are always empty in the morning. Soon they are coming, and there's nothing much I can do about it, except wait. I've been renovating my grandfather's house after his death and have found several things that confounded me, and some that amused me. You see, he was an artist and a really good one at that. He created several sculptures, paintings, even some machines that could have easily won him some award had he been brave enough to show them off. Sadly, he was also a bit reclusive, but I faintly remember him sending my family a letter every season with a small animal, carved by him obviously, attached to it. Nevertheless, he also had a bad side. First of all, he was the biggest perfectionist to walk this planet. There is a place where it's healthy, and it drives us to be better, but his perfectionism was through the roof, and extremely unbeneficial. Secondly, and this is the thing that annoyed me the most, it was his immense need and want for money. Not only was he greedy, but he had never spent a penny on family outings. Even the carved animals he had made for us was made from the wood of the tree in his backyard. Now that you know a bit about him, I won't waste any more time and get into the particularity that happened today. So, as I was cleaning his drawers and mopping his bedroom, I stumbled across his secret diary. It looked like it hadn't been used for ages. obviously contradicting the truth. I, being the curious and intrusive person that I am, read the last few entries of it, and it shook me to the core. I'll copy his last 6 entries because they're the weirdest of them all. First letter, 2021, 11/21. Finally, no one believed in me, but I proved everyone wrong. The famous Louis Caballo sent me an email this morning asking me to create a giant painting that would resemble his carrier from start to finish. I have never been this excited to start working. He even promised me a large sum of money, $10 million fucking dollars, that I could not turn down. It all seems so surreal and I still pinch myself, waiting to wake up in my old, stained bed and walk on my moist, plain carpet. But after this, it will all change thanks to the generosity of Louis. I already planned some things. I'll be starting tonight and create a quick sketch for the painting, then begin the artwork 2 days later on Saturday. Hope I still have it in me, as I haven't really done anything noteworthy the past few months. At first I even pondered the validity of the email, as why would someone as famous as Louis Caballo want a painting from someone as insignificant like me? However, that doesn't matter right now. What does matter is to make an exceptional job, one that will be remembered even after my death, one that would imprint my name in the history books, and one that would make me an icon and an idol for the young generation. Second letter, 2021, 11/24. I started working on the painting yesterday, and to be completely honest, it's been pretty rough. I've caught myself losing focus, not really having motivation, and sometimes even painting without properly realizing that I'm doing it, creating a mess on the canvas. I blame it on the fact that I haven't been active that much recently. Being as old as I am without any big or prominent creation has left a bad stain on my name. Sometimes I think about my life choices and regret them, as I could have been a celebrated artist had I been more talkative and proud of my work. Now I feel like this is the last chance to actually do something worthwhile. If I can do this correctly, I won't feel like my whole life has been a waste, and I can retire and live a comfortable lifestyle until my inevitable death. If I fail this as well, I will die knowing that no one has been proud of me, knowing that I haven't done anything notable or even noticeable. I don't want that. Who wants that? No one does. Third letter, 2021, 12/02. I don't understand what's wrong with me. My smooth lines have turned into rough messes of random colors and my characters look terrible. I've been doing this for the past week, non-stop, but I just feel like I've made no progress at all. And even if I did, it could be discarded because of its quality. I've been thinking of taking a break for a few days, but how would that help me? I've been on a break for the last 5 months doing nothing. I look at my older creations in disbelief and wonder, where did all my skill evaporate to? I should still be able to paint things I'm proud of and things that people would buy. Would people pay for this? Right now it looks like a mess, with colors placed haphazardly throughout the canvas and my muddy footprints in some corners. I just feel so disorganized and don't know what to do about it. I think I'll still have to skip the carving session for my grandchildren this year, as I have to be completely devoted to this piece of work. I really hope it will only get better from here. The clown masks that I've drawn when I was younger are placed on my walls, and looks like they're laughing at me while I'm failing miserably. My other paintings that are placed throughout the house usually give me inspiration. Now they just look like things that mock me for the work I'm doing now. I know it's not that great yet, but... And then he crossed out. You don't have to rub it in my fucking face. And then we get back to the actual letter. It should get better. It will get better. It must. I'm doing all I can, and I'm known for my stubbornness. If I put my mind to something, it will work out in the end. You can count on that. Fourth letter, 2021 12/26. I've become a mess. I'm starting to be forgetful and inattentive. I've also started dreaming about really dark and eerie images. This night, it was the image of my family holding knives at the dinner table, ready to, and then he crossed out, slice me into multiple pieces and eat. Then we get back to the letter. Kill me. I've also become really paranoid. I swear I'm hearing movement in the house and sometimes even hear things whisper. It usually happens during my painting time. The faces on the walls start changing shape, and once I've caught them talking to each other, no one would believe me though. That's why I'm not telling my family. I'm probably just really stressed and paranoid anyways. Sleeping is going too well nowadays either. There's this voice inside my head that just won't shut up. I took sleeping pills, but they haven't been that effective. And since I wanted to feel better about myself and my work, I took some paintings off the walls. Even if it looks a bit emptier, at least now it doesn't feel like I'm... And then he crossed out. Being made fun of. And then we get back to the letter. I should aim for that level of accuracy. I mean, the reason I put them up is because they came out perfect. This painting won't be perfect. It doesn't have to be. I just have to make it semi-pleasing and I'll get paid. What do they know? These famous, snob and spoiled celebrities that don't know real art anyways. They won't ever know the pain and struggles us artists need to put into our work. And then he crossed out. They're talentless, only fueled by pitiful emotions. Pathetic. I deserve to be in their place. I deserve to be that rich and famous. I should be there, not Louis Caballo. Then we get back to the letter. I think I'll take the clown masks down as well. I keep spacing out and staring at them. Also some dolls that are placed disorderly in the room. I keep staring and staring at anything that isn't this painting. My only moment of tranquility. Anytime I'm focused, or trying to be as it doesn't really work anymore, my head hurts and I lose my train of thought and ideas. It's horrible. I just really have to finish, and once it's done, I can be comfortable. I could even upgrade and buy a better house or car. Heck, why not buy two with that much money? Fifth letter. There isn't a date on this entry, but I believe it's somewhere between January the 4th and January the 25th. I broke them. It wasn't on purpose. I just impulsively did. The masks, I've tore them down, but they keep laughing and staring and getting ingrained in my mind. I found my hammer and smashed them. It's stopped now, but I'm scared. They could come back any time. I called my family today just to check on them. It was nice to hear their voice. It really calmed me down. Maybe I did go down the wrong path. Maybe I really should have accepted a better and more stable job and spent more time with my family. The paintings in my house have also been taken down. I took them to my garage and lit them on fire. It was good to watch them burn. Sometimes it's good to release your past. They give you false and inaccurate expectations that you should follow. I think that's bullshit. We evolve. We shouldn't rely on our past self and past experiences. The world's moving and it never stops. I've also moved my bed to the painting room. I have no real motivation of leaving this room. Why would I? Anything outside is just a reminder of my depressing life. That pretty, colorful vase I made when I was 22. I just wanted the money, but since no one bought it, I decided to keep it. The paintings that don't exist anymore, they're still up on eBay, where I keep lowering the prices month by month so someone would buy them. But no one does. Am I really such a huge failure? Am I not deserving of a good life? Maybe I was too narcissistic. Maybe I don't actually have any skills, especially not in painting. Alright, the painting. I've decided it would look better with my muddy footprints on it. It expresses my emotions towards Louis and the other celebrities that got lucky in life. I feel like it's a nice addition to it. Wouldn't you agree? Well, I mean, what do you know? You're just someone that appeared on TV once, said a sentence to make the audience laugh, and now have a whole army of delusional, stupid, self-centered, special people behind you. I also keep seeing figures from the corners of my eyes. Honestly, while it should be scary, I find it really comforting. I've never been too close to my family. I didn't even visit them this Christmas. Seeing those things in my house just adds a layer of safety and comfort. At least I know that I'm not all alone. At least there are still things that care about me. Sixth letter. 2022 2/13. I finally finished the painting today. I'm really proud of the final product. It contains my blood, sweat, and tears. The figures also agree with me. They have taken up a form that is unique to them, and I think it fits them. There are 3 of them, and they are always watching me. They pay attention to me. They don't ever let me have a moment of silence to myself. They just keep whispering and whispering, and I like it. Finally, I'm being noticed. People adore me and my work. I began calling them my friends, appreciate me, and give me new and wonderful ideas for my other creations. They requested me to tear down the wallpapers from the walls, which I happily obliged to. What kind of sick celebrity wouldn't comply to the demand of their followers? Well, I guess most of them, but I'm different. My friends can finally see I'm not envious anymore. I'm happy with what I have. And then he crossed out the word lies. Other people just have to find my work and see the inner beauty within them. It's not hard. You just have to be perceptive and accepting to new and rational ideas. Needless to say, I'm satisfied. And then he crossed out the word no. With how everything turned out at the end. I'm content with life and my followers. I'm not lonely anymore. I finally achieved what I wanted to, and now I can finally unlock the door, go up to my bed and rest. I deserve it. My friends will keep me safe from anything. Goodbye, and good night.
Prison guards of Reddit, what is the most extreme thing you ever saw happen in your prison? One of my former teachers used to provide mental health services in the county jail. She said the worst thing she saw was an inmate who went insane. He was quiet and polite, and doing a small amount of time for a minor crime. But then, he got in one small fight and was moved to max, and something in him snapped. He decompensated so quickly that by day 4, he was smearing feces on the wall and singing nursery rhymes. He was taken away by ambulance and was never seen again. My dad was in prison and the craziest day he experienced was sometime around the end of his first week in. He had been keeping his head down, but one of the other inmates told him to meet him outside by the corner of one of the building during their free time outside. He was hesitant because he didn't want to get into trouble right out of the gate. He looked toward the corner of the building and saw a small group of guys huddled and he got even more concerned. Just as he was going to walk away they noticed him and called him over. He accepted. These guys were passing around a cantaloupe and sharing it. Each guy had a spoon and they'd take a bite and pass it on. A family member and I used to work at the same prison and the prisoners knew we were related. My family member got into a minor car accident and had a few weeks off work to recover. Word got out about it to all the prisoners, and I constantly got asked how I was coping because they all heard it was super serious. It wasn't. While one was asking me what happened when we had a lockdown code so everyone had to go back to their blocks. Came to find out in the incident report that a fight had started because 2 prisoners heard 2 different stories on what happened to my family member, couldn't agree, started a punch-up and got the whole block of about 80 guys brawling. Whole place got locked down for like 10 hours. All because my family member can't drive. This is taking the word extreme to a different level, but when I was a prison guard, female working in a men's max, I worked in the kitchen. I tried to be firm, fair and consistent and it worked. I mean, I went home whole every night. Somehow a few of the prisoners found out it was my birthday and towards the middle of my shift they had me come around the office, and there on the table was a 4-layer industrial-sized cake with pink frosting. I was touched. They told me to get my piece before everyone else did, and not even 10 minutes later it was gone. Not a guard but a prison nurse. Had to respond to a cell fight where one man bit off another man's nose. The most extreme one I heard though was from a doctor I worked with. My first patient ate her own eyeball. I did a bit in Florida about 4 years ago. While I was inside, they let my cell block come into the common area to watch the iHeartRadio Awards. Never would have watched it on my own, but it was nice to have the distraction. This was the summer that Ariana Grande had that One Less Problem song, and she performed it right before J-Lo came to the stage. Now, I'm in with mostly Puerto Rican inmates, so J-Lo being on was a big goddamn deal. Some dude just loses his mind during the Ariana Grande song, some of the dudes said he was into little girls or something, and throws a very lightweight plastic chair at the TV. Didn't think it would do much damage, but it busted the LCD. Hell broke loose. Dudes weren't gonna get a chance to see J-Lo's butt, and they wanted blood for it. I ran my gringo behind back to my cell, and a 60-man brawl ensued. All of this to say, in the midst of the insanity, one guy bit another guy's thumb off. And swallowed it. Not mine but my dad's. First day he was there a riot occurred because some dumb prisoner thought it would be funny if he stole a book from a prisoner and blamed it on someone else. Long story short, the guy who was blamed had all 4 of his limbs broken and his face beaten to a pulp. Apparently they already had beef between them. Via my father, one prisoner was trying to kill his cellmate, but didn't have a weapon. So he took a pen, stuck it in the guy's ear and stomped on it. It came out of the victim's mouth. My dad was a P officer in the prison service for a couple decades. He has a few stories. One that I always remember was there was this one kid who was about 16 but he was about 6 feet 4 inches and built like a tank. He also had a bit of a temper. One day when my dad is supervising the gym workout, he looks over towards the benches and this kid picks up a 34 kilograms dumbbell, lifts it above his head and starts to swing it down onto another inmate's head who is laying on one of the benches. My dad manages to sprint over, grab this kid and pin him against the wall, just in time to stop him from killing the other inmate. At this point my dad is thinking, if this kid wants to fight, he is probably going to win. But luckily he had a good reputation so the kid didn't fight, but also other inmates alerted other guards. If he was able to carry through with that swing, that inmate's head would literally have exploded. There is no other outcome to that. It was straight up attempted murder. Nothing ended up happening with the kid. The prison head didn't deem it to be much of an issue because no one was hurt, so my dad brought the 34 kilograms dumbbell into the meeting to show her. She didn't care, ignored it because it makes her prison look better on paper. I was just an inmate, but when I was locked up in the Bronx, I remember people making shivs out of the toothbrushes we were given. Also one guy screamed bloody murder to prove that the COs didn't give a crap about what went on in the holding cells. No one checked on us. Also, the COs would purposely throw rival gang members into the same cell. I'll never forget some of their screams as they got hauled off into enemy territory. Edit, also saw people get beat by the COs and pepper sprayed in the face while incapacitated. Then left in handcuffs for hours so they couldn't wash the spray off. Their screams were pretty bad too. One dude had a seizure and it took about an hour for a medical response. AMA, I don't really get to talk about this experience in real life. An inmate with mental issues and HIV sliced his stomach open with a razor. Line was from below sternum to just below belly button. Survived, but man it was ugly. Not me but my mom is a prison nurse. She once had a dude swallow a balloon filled with drugs, and it popped or leaked in his stomach and he overdosed. I was a mailroom employee at the unit in Texas that houses death row. For security reasons most of death row inmates had their mail constantly scanned or read, while other inmates just had them searched for contraband. This whole process was a knee-jerk process out in place after a governor was threatened from death row. Then bringing the mail to the inmates and telling them you read it and found some stuff was terrifying because they obviously never liked and often threatened violence. The stuff you read is pretty insane. I read plenty of neo-Nazi plots to help bring in the New World Order, stuff that was completely encoded in their own little systems, and all sorts of absolutely depressing stuff. The worst one I ever read had to have been the one of an inmate who was scheduled for execution the next day, and was sending a bunch of "F you" letters to the victim's family. As if they hadn't been through enough. Not a prison guard, but my good friend is. This happened a week ago. 2 prisoners were shouting and eventually got into a fight, which led to a full-out riot. Where things got extreme was, they ripped a TV out of the wall to get to the electrical cables and frayed them. Then got bags of toilet papers and used the cables and toilet paper to create fireballs during the riot. Small fires were all over the place as well as the classic shanks and bludgeoning weapons. Furthermore, all the prisoners used their pillowcases with eyes cut out, so they couldn't be identified and proven guilty for anything they did, which led to them really removing any inhibitions. They basically had a room full of the KKK going full riot, murdering each other and flinging fireballs. When the fire department arrived, they tried using the hose to get cellmates back into their cells, which somehow wasn't working. SWAT and pepperball officers were also brought in. I was watching from outside. It was quite spectacular. Not me and not a prison guard, but one of my college professors used to teach at a prison. She was a Portuguese literature teacher for them. This happened in Brazil. She was teaching the inmates, all male, about poetry, and it was close to Mother's Day, so she told them to write a poem about their own mothers. This was in a very impoverished area, and she told us all the inmates were illiterate before she started with them. One of the inmates wrote a beautiful poem about his deceased mother, that was killed right before he was arrested when he was much younger. He was arrested for killing his father, who murdered his mom. All the inmates started clapping and whistling, because it was so beautiful and heartbreaking, but then the guards went nuts thinking they were messing around and started beating the inmates so they would be quiet. Classes were cancelled after that. My professor said it was all very shocking. It was a pure scene with people bonding and learning, and the guards resorted to violence without even thinking. She never went back to teach at a prison again. My dad was a prison guard in Tennessee. Every Thursday was pork chop day and Max. When you have nothing, you live for the little things. One day they ran out of pork chops and a dumb guard tells the back of the line, "They're all out of pork chops, the rest of you guys are getting bologna." Minor riot with a 6-hour lockdown, 2 broken bones, and like 10 people had to be treated by the nurse. Not quite the same, but my aunt was a psychiatrist in a women's prison in the 70s. They had a change of warden from someone reasonably reasonable to someone who was extremely unreasonable. One of the things she instigated was a work program to help landscape a garden for the prison. Naturally, a number of the prisoners decided to sign up with the chance to be outside. However, it wasn't until after they'd signed up that they found out that it was replacing their usual rec time, meaning they had no breaks and more work. The warden was insistent that she have a flower garden for the prisoners to enjoy, as it would be calming. It just so happened to be facing her window. So diligently, the lady prisoners worked and planted flowers ready for the coming spring. So along comes spring, and during the time that the flowers had, well, flowered, the warden had been on a 2-week holiday. She came back to a lovely view from her office window. F off. Spelt in begonias, in 10 feet high font. My dad worked at the Chino prison for years and told me a story. He was going around doing checks, and as he was leaving a hall, a prisoner called out to him, "Hey Smith," not his real name, and my dad asked him what. The inmate told him, "Come here." My dad, not wanting to deal with this, just says, "What? Just tell me." The inmate says, "Smith, I really need you to come here right now." My dad, a bit annoyed, goes over to him and says, "What?" The inmate then whispers to him, "You left your keys in that door, go get them now." My dad looks, and sure enough, he had left his keys in that door. He grabbed them and then gave the inmate a big thank you and slipped him a few packs of smokes. My dad says that inmates were typically good to him, because he always treated them fair and with respect, but always made sure they knew he was the one in charge.